Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, hey what's up? Really glad you clicked on this one because honestly, we're about to get into one of the most insane stories in history that almost nobody talks about. I know when you hear World War, your brain probably goes straight to the 1900s, right? Trenches, tanks, just massive destruction everywhere. But get this, the actual First World War happened way earlier. We're talking the 1700s, like over 150 years before World War I even started. Try to picture what I'm about to describe. You've got empires fighting each other on 5 continents. 5 armies are marching through frozen battlefields in Europe, then you've got fighting in the misty North American forests, brutal combat in the sweltering heat of India, battles on these Caribbean sugar islands, even conflicts on the African coast where the slave trade was happening. Kings, queens, officers who'd later become famous, native warriors, Indian princes, just regular farmers trying to survive. Everyone got pulled into this thing. It literally changed how the entire world map looked. So this isn't going to be some boring textbook recap. We're diving into the 7 Years' War, ran from 1756 to 1763, and it basically decided which countries would run the show for the next century. Britain became the superpower because of this war. France? They lost pretty much everything they had in North America. And there was this young guy, George Washington, that George Washington, who got his military start here. Plus, this whole conflict planted the seeds for what would eventually become the American Revolution. Here's maybe the craziest part of all this. The entire global war started because of one small ambush in the Pennsylvania wilderness, led by a 22-year-old lieutenant colonel who had absolutely zero idea he was about to trigger worldwide conflict. If you're into underdog stories, brilliant military tactics, betrayals that change everything, and history that actually shaped how we live today, you're gonna love this. Grab a drink or whatever, get comfortable because this is gonna take a bit. Hit the like button if you're ready to dive in, subscribe if you want more deep history content, and let's just get into it. Okay, so we need to go back to the early 1700s first. Europe at this point was basically a powder keg. Everyone's just standing around with lit matches waiting for something to blow. For decades you had these two massive royal dynasties constantly at each other's throats. The Bourbon kings controlling France and the Habsburg family running Austria. They fought over everything. Who gets to be in charge of Europe? Border disputes that never seemed to end. Royal marriages that went horribly wrong. Basically constant my army's bigger than yours competitions. Right before our story starts, there was this really messy war called the War of the Austrian Succession. Lasted from 1740 to 1748. France teamed up with Prussia to fight Austria and Britain. Prussia had this young king, Frederick II. People eventually started calling him Frederick the Great, and somehow he managed to win some absolutely crazy battles and grabbed this super valuable province called Silesia away from Austria. The Austrian leader, Empress Maria Theresa, was so angry about losing Silesia, like she never got over it. Getting it back became her life's mission basically. When that war ended with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748, sure, everyone signed the papers, but literally nobody was happy about it. France felt cheated out of gains. Austria wanted revenge. Britain was hungry for more colonies. Prussia was constantly paranoid about keeping what they just won. All the old alliances started crumbling apart. Then 1756 happens and there's this plot twist that absolutely nobody saw coming. Historians call it the diplomatic revolution. Maria Theresa, the same woman whose family had hated France for literally generations, she secretly starts making deals with the French King Louis XV. Why would she do this? Well, Britain had been kind of a terrible ally, always putting their own interests first, especially when it came to protecting Hanover, which was tied to the British throne. Austria needed a partner powerful enough to help destroy Prussia and take Silesia back. This made Britain panic. King George II desperately needed somebody to protect his German lands, so he turned to the one guy who hated Austria just as much, Frederick the Great of Prussia. Britain and Prussia worked out the secret deal where Britain would pay Frederick to keep fighting in Europe, and Prussia would protect Hanover. Russia joined the anti-Prussia side too because Empress Elizabeth was worried Frederick was expanding way too close to Russian borders. Spain and Sweden eventually jumped in. Suddenly the whole European alliance system completely flipped. France and Austria, who'd been enemies forever, were now partners. Britain and Prussia became allies, and everyone was gearing up for total war. But here's what you need to understand. This wasn't just some European argument. The real fuel for this fire came from overseas. Both Britain and France were absolutely obsessed with building empires, and their traders, soldiers, and colonists kept running into each other in the most remote places on Earth. In India, both countries had these East India companies. These were basically armed trading corporations with their own private armies, which sounds insane, but that's literally what they were. They'd bribe local rulers, fight these proxy wars, the Carnatic Wars, all competing to control spice and textile trades. North America had even worse tensions brewing. British colonists were packed into the East Coast, those famous 13 colonies, and their population was exploding. They needed land desperately. France, meanwhile, claimed this absolutely enormous territory running from Canada all the way down the Mississippi to Louisiana. Massive forests, huge rivers, fur trading posts everywhere. They built forts specifically to block British settlers from pushing west, especially in the Ohio River Valley. Native American nations like the Iroquois and Huron, they played both sides, making alliances with whoever offered better deals or protection. So where did everything actually start? This tiny remote patch of wilderness in western Pennsylvania. 1754. George Washington's just 21 years old. Yes, the future first president, and he's a lieutenant colonel in the Virginia militia. Young, ambitious, fearless, maybe a little reckless honestly. The British want him to push back against French forts in the Ohio Valley. Washington takes this small group of colonial troops plus some Mingo native allies, led by a chief people called the Half-King, deep into the forest. They're hunting for a French scouting party. May 28th, they find them camped in this quiet glen near modern-day Uniontown, Pennsylvania. What happens next is like straight out of a movie. Washington's men surround the French camp. It's pouring rain. Somebody fires a shot. To this day, nobody knows who fired first, and everything just explodes. The whole skirmish lasts maybe 15 minutes. 10 French soldiers die, including their commander Joseph Coulon de Jumonville. Washington's group takes 21 prisoners. The French went absolutely ballistic over this. They claimed Jumonville was on a diplomatic mission carrying official papers ordering the British to leave. Washington said they were spies. About a month later, back in America, the French started strong. They'd captured key British forts, Oswego in 1756, William Henry in 1757. But Britain had this massive population advantage. Roughly 2 million colonists compared to maybe 70,000 to 100,000 in New France. Then William Pitt the Elder becomes Britain's Secretary of State, and this guy was brilliant. His strategy was simple but genius. Pump money into Prussia to keep French forces busy fighting in Europe, while the Royal Navy and colonial troops attack France's overseas empire. 1758, the British grab Louisbourg, crucial French fortress in Nova Scotia. They take Fort Duquesne, eventually becomes Pittsburgh, and Fort Frontenac. Bloodiest fight happened at Carillon, also called Ticonderoga, July 1758. Thousands died when the French fought off a much larger British attack. Then 1759 happens. This year changed everything for Britain. In Europe, the Royal Navy crushes French fleets at Lagos and Quiberon Bay. That ended any realistic hope France had of invading Britain. In North America, the big prize, Battle of the Plains of Abraham outside Quebec City, September 13th, 1759. British General James Wolfe, young, brilliant, but sickly, pulls off this insane nighttime landing and gets his troops to climb cliffs to reach the plains behind the city. French commander Louis-Joseph de Montcalm rushes out to fight instead of waiting for reinforcements. Battle lasts maybe 15 to 30 minutes. British soldiers hold fire until the French get terrifyingly close, then unleash devastating volleys. Both generals mortally wounded. Wolfe dies on the battlefield after hearing they won. Montcalm dies next morning. Quebec falls. Path to conquering all Canada wide open. French Empire in North America finished. British also grab Caribbean territory and African posts. Guadeloupe taken. French slave trading posts in Senegal captured. For Britain, 1759 was miraculous. Church bells ringing everywhere across the country. People called it Annus Mirabilis. Prussia didn't have such luck in 1759 though. At Kunersdorf in August, Frederick suffers his worst defeat, over 40% casualties against a Russian-Austrian force. He barely escapes alive. Writes, everything is lost in total despair. But Frederick was unbreakable. Regroups, wins at Liegnitz and Torgau in 1760, keeps fighting despite being outnumbered everywhere. War drags on. Governments going bankrupt. Armies exhausted. Spain jumps in 1762 under King Charles III, worried about British dominance. Britain declares war and quickly grabs Havana, Cuba, and Manila, Philippines through daring amphibious operations. In Europe, a combined Franco-Spanish invasion of Portugal, Britain's ally, fails spectacularly. Biggest surprise? Russia. Empress Elizabeth dies January 1762. Her successor Peter III is actually a huge Frederick the Great fan. Russia completely switches sides, abandons Austria, even sends troops to help Prussia. Peter gets overthrown pretty quick by his wife Catherine the Great, but the damage, or salvation depending on perspective, already done. Sweden makes peace too. France and Austria realize they can't win. Peace talks begin. February 1763, 2 treaties end the war. Treaty of Hubertusburg between Prussia and Austria basically restores status quo in Europe. Prussia keeps Silesia. Frédéric survivait d'un possible ode. Treaty of Paris between Britain, France, and Spain was total British victory. France gives up almost all Canada and everything east of Mississippi to Britain. Spain trades Florida to get Cuba back, gets Louisiana from France. Britain returns some Caribbean islands because they were incredibly profitable for sugar. In India, Britain's now clearly the top foreign power. 7 Years' War changed everything about the world. Britain emerged as dominant colonial and naval superpower, but it cost a fortune. Massive war debt forced new taxes on American American colonies. Colonists who'd fought alongside British soldiers started resenting this whole taxation without representation thing. Within 12 years, that resentment exploded into the American Revolution. France humiliated and broke. Losing empire created resentment that helped trigger French Revolution 1789. Prussia proved it belonged among great powers. Austria